Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. It's just gone 1 p.m. UK time, so I'm just going to give everyone a chance to join. Do feel free to drop into the Q&A box and say hi. We've disabled the chat feature as we've discovered it can cause problems for some people using screen readers. So just going to make a start now. So hi everyone and welcome to our webinar, the European Accessibility Act, 1 year to go, are you ready? I'm Emma Wheeler, Marketing Manager here at AbilityNet. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by my colleague Vayia, who is the Accessibility and Usability Consultant at AbilityNet. And she will be leading today's fireside chat with two great panelists. Before we get started, I'll just run through a few bits of housekeeping. Today we're going to be joined by my clear text and they'll be providing live captions. You can turn on the captions using the CC option in the control panel. Additionally, captions are also available via streamtext.net/player?event equals AbilityNet. Also, the slides and transcript and recording of this webinar will be available in a couple of days' time on our website. The webpage is abilitynet.org.uk/webinar-EAA-webinar. If you have any technical issues and you need to leave early, don't worry. You'll receive an email in a couple of days' time with the recording, transcripts and slides. And also, depending on how you joined the webinar, you'll find a Q&A window. If you want to ask our panelists any questions, do drop those into the Q&A area for them to address online after the webinar. Also, please feel free to leave feedback in the post-webinar survey. So I'll start with a little bit about AbilityNet now. Our vision is a digital world accessible to all. To help achieve this goal, our specialist services we offer to organisations are to help them build more accessible and inclusive workplaces, websites and apps. So we're going to start today's session with a video recording we did 2 weeks ago with Christopher Patnoe, Head of Accessibility and Digital Inclusion at Google.
So my name is Christopher, and I am the head of EMEA, Accessibility and Disability Inclusion for Google. I moved to the UK in 2021 because of the European Accessibility Act. In mid-2020, I realized that we weren't paying attention, and we probably should. So I pitched my job to come to Europe to get us ready. So I guess number one advice is talk to your legal team so you can be clear what their definition, their meaning the EU, what the EU definition of product is, because it might be different than yours. And I've been surprised a couple of times. I had a more inclusive view of what I thought was influenced and impacted, and I've been corrected several times because my definition was different than what was in the documentation. Everyone had heard of it. The interesting question is the ROI question. How bad is it really? And it's a reasonable question when you're talking to that middle manager layer who is making the decisions of this feature over that feature, this bug over that bug. They decide what gets done. So you need to be able to have an answer of what's the risk, what's the likeliness of the risk, what's the severity of the risk. And you need to do that in conjunction with your legal team, because we the accessibility professionals, want it to be everything. Really everything. Realistically, that can't happen. So you need to walk that prioritization process carefully and thoughtfully. And so again, this is why you want to partner with your legal team, but also you want to make sure that you focus with the people that understand the laws in these different member states, because the declaration is not everything. And also, if I may, so many of us are so used to just talking about WCAG. Well, the EN 301 549 standard is a completely different standard, and you need to find where those gaps are for your product. You may be 100%, well, no one's 100%. You may be AAA compliant in 2.1. It doesn't mean you're going to be compliant in terms of EN 301 549. So there's work to do there in terms of understanding the gaps between where your product is. Even if you're killing it in terms of WCAG, there may be things that you have to think about, especially if you have these broader products, that might be important. Yeah, I'm lucky that we've been on this accessibility journey for many years. So everybody that comes in is trained about accessibility. They have an understanding. They know the nouns, the verbs, the expectations. We have corporate-wide expectations for many of our products. So it's just the language of accessibility is understood and known. What we need to do is anytime there's new legislation, whether it's in the US or the UK or the EU, we need to make sure that they're aware of it with enough time to be able to react to it. Because WCAG is often turning and there's new legislation coming in around the world. This is a process that we've built, but this is just a bit more intense because it's so broad in so many spaces. And an example, though, our hardware team, they've been dealing with the CE markings forever. They just said, okay, tell me what's the new stuff we need to keep track of. And we'll just do it because this is what we do. So for some teams, it could be just business as usual, just with a couple new things they have to track. Other teams, it can be a completely new way of thinking about how to do things because of some feature that they connect into European Accessibility Act. I'm sort of making this up, but I think you know what I'm trying to go. So it'll be easier for some than for others. What the legislation doing is it is giving us an easier story to tell. It makes it easier for us to say why it's important because legislation's coming. In the US, they have the American with Disabilities Act, and it's not been particularly well enforced. Some of the rules don't have any teeth. So rules without teeth are useless. Here we see 17 different mouths with different kinds of teeth. We don't know whose teeth are going to be the sharpest or which teeth have the most bites. So we have this interesting opportunity that they're paying attention. Teams know that they have this additional work that they have to do. So now we can lean on them and help them be successful. There's the opportunity to lose the right to sell your product in the country, and some of these countries in EU are big. France and Germany, Spain, Italy, these aren't small countries, and losing the right to sell product would have a business impact, and that matters. But just because, say, Kenya has EN 301.549 as its standard, they're not really enforcing it yet. So the work that we're doing here for Europe is also going to actually make it easy for us to do work in Africa in the future and other countries as Canada just took EN 31549 as their standard. So the work that we're doing here for the EU is going to make our lives easier in the future because of this standardization. Come in with the lawyers with an understanding of what it means. Have the conversation of yes, you're impacted, and then ask to do the scoping exercise. You're not asking them to fix it. You're asking them to tell, okay, let's see how much work we have to actually do. That's a really great place to start because you've already got them agreeing with you. They know it's a risk and they want to know more. They can't commit to anything until they know what they have to do. If you can leave that meeting with a commitment to do a scoping exercise, you've done a really good job. Let me explain to you how we're doing this inside Google at a high level. So we have a central accessibility team, and we're the ones that sort of set the strategy, set the definitions, help with training. We are the ones that are sort of driving the overall analysis, and that we partner with each of the different product teams across Google and help them make the decisions in terms of what's important, what's at risk, and help them make their own decisions. We are focusing more with legal teams, accessibility analysts, experts in terms of statutes and standards and things like that, so to create a common understanding of what we think these things mean. And then we'll share that across the company. And each team will have their own set of designers and engineers and their own accessibility experts and their own counsel to interpret what we're providing for them to apply towards their needs. So it depends on where you are in this circle of work. Someone needs to provide a common language, but then it's up to each team to consume it and see how relevant it is to what they're building.
Thank you very much for sharing all of that with us today, Christopher.
Oh, my pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm now going to pass over to Vayia for the fireside chat.
Thank you, Emma. So today we are joined by our two panelists, Susanna Laurin. She is the Managing Director and Chair at Funka Foundation, a not-for-profit independent organization that carries out research to support inclusion and accessibility for persons of all abilities, based in Sweden, and Sabine Lobnig, Director for Communications at Mobile and Wireless Forum, an international association of companies with an interest in mobile and wireless communications based in Belgium. So welcome both. I'm going to start our chat by mentioning that in 2022, 27% of the EU population over the age of 16 had some form of disability. According to Eurostat estimates, this equals to 101 million people, or to make it a little bit more understandable, 1 in 4 adults in the EU. So with a view to make various products and services more accessible for older people and people with disabilities, the EU adopted 2 directives in order to establish common accessibility standards. The Public Sector Web Accessibility Directive in 2016, defining standards to make digital products and services more accessible to all users, and the European Accessibility Act in 2019, defining minimum accessibility requirements for key products and services. 26 of the 27 member states have now incorporated the second directive, the EAA, which is what our discussion today is about, into their national laws, ready to be enforced from June 28, 2025. We've heard from Christopher about what is happening in preparation for this at Google. So my first question to you, Susanna, is, in the year leading up to the directive's enforcement, what steps should businesses take to ensure they can demonstrate compliance on June the 28th, 2025?
Thank you, Vayia. That's kind of a big question, I think, and we don't have the whole week to answer, but I think it really depends on two things mainly, how large the organization is, of course, what you're doing, but I think the size really matters here, and also what you have done before. But if you are new to this, or rather new to this, or a little bit worried about the legislation, I would say start with looking at where you are. You need to do some kind of state-of-the-art. What competencies do we have in-house? Where are we? Do we know if we are accessible? Do we have the right suppliers and all of that? In order to move in any direction, you need to know where you are at the map. So I would start looking kind of at my toes or internally, where are we right now? That would be the first step. And then I hope that people don't only start moving on this because there is a legislation coming up. I hope they're moving on this because it's a really smart thing to do, not only to be nice to people, but really for quality assurance, the essence of this legislation is to maximize the foreseeable use. And I think that is such a nice definition of accessibility, because this is what it's all about. So instead of saying, oh no, we need to follow this regulation, why is somebody doing this bad thing to me? Think of it as an opportunity, as Christopher also said, that this is really a way to harmonize and make sure we all have the same rules. So it will be a fair playing ground for all organizations. And now soon we have the common standards. So if we follow that, that's also a kind of a good help for the organizations. So first looking at where you are, and then using the voluntary standards to move in the right direction, and hopefully ending up somewhere where your product or service has become better for people instead of just compliant.
Thank you. And Sabine, when it comes to the information and communication technology, shortened as known as ICT, and the mobile phone industry as well, what are the industry's concerns regarding the EAA, and how are businesses preparing for it?
Yes, thank you, Vayia. So first off, we prepared a few slides. Maybe that would be a good point where Kelly can bring them up. So we actually did what Susanna suggested. We looked at where we stand right now. Just as a short explanation on who we are, I work for the Mobile and Wireless Forum, and we are the International Association of the Device Manufacturers. So our members are the big companies like Apple, Google, Samsung, LG, Sony, the ones really manufacturing the devices. And as Christopher mentioned in his video talk, we are lucky that already 15, 20 years ago, our companies have started on the journey. So we have come a long way. But still, as Susanna mentioned, we did need to do our homework and look at where we actually stand right now in relation to the requirements under the European Accessibility Act. And so how did we do this? We looked at all the requirements in the Annex 1 of the European Accessibility Act, where we have outlined the things that our products and services need to fulfill, because it's a market access directive, so they need to fulfill it so that we are still allowed to sell them, to put them on the market in the EU. a really big deal, as Christopher mentioned also. So we looked at those requirements, and then we looked at the one standard that we currently have, which is the EN 301-549, the standard for public procurement of accessible ICT. And we looked at the features that we actually have in our devices already. And a good overview for that is the GARI database. So that's an online repository where you can get a good understanding of all the accessibility features we already have in our devices. And we looked at what's required, what do we have in the standard, and what is in the device today. And if you go to the next slide, that takes the form of breaking it down and making it understandable what the requirement means in practice. If you switch to the next slide, let's look if it works. Doesn't seem to work, doesn't matter. So we looked, here it is, thank you very much. So we looked, for example, at the requirement, the device needs to be, or it has to be able to be used without vision. That sounds great for everyone who works in accessibility. For the end consumer, maybe not so clear what that means. So in the device today, if we have a screen reader, if we have text-to-speech capability, if we have a personal assistant, if we have all those features, we can consider that we can use the device without vision. Then usage with limited vision. If you have a look at the screen, you can see there are 11 features listed. And these are just examples. That doesn't mean that there are not more features, but we just looked at all the features that we consider as the minimum to be able to fulfill the requirement. And if you switch to the next slide, we did the same exercise for hearing. So usage without hearing, almost 10 features. Usage with limited hearing, a little bit less, but 8 or 7 features. And we did that for every single requirement, just to visualize what the requirement under the EAA means and what we have in the device today. But Vayia, you asked me about our open questions. There are indeed a few, because we have the requirements, we have the standard that is available, but in the standard we have a few gaps. So for example, real-time text, total conversation capability, the requirements for non-digital information to be accessible. So these are not deal breakers, because I would say 90% are clear, 90% we have the answers, we know what to do to implement. But the last 10% approximately, we have open questions. And I know that Susanna is very hard working with the standards committees to bring us the answers, but they will be a little bit late. And you also need to factor in that the device manufacturers need about 18 months to implement a technical change. So given that the deadline is now in less than a year and the standards are not there yet, we know there will be a little bit of delay. But again, we are preparing. There is a lot that we can already do, and the answers then will come on the way. And we hope that, you know, until we have the answers, that we get a little bit of leeway to the final implementation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And both of you have kind of highlighted the importance of kind of finding for businesses to find where they are on the map, as you said, Susanna. And if they want to actually find the directions to the destination, where would you say that businesses can go to find these directions, guidance on working towards the European Accessibility Act compliance? Sabine, would you like to take this first?
Sure, I get started and then I hand over the tricky part to Susanna to complete. Okay, so the first thing, I mean, the easiest step would be look at the technology that you're already using, because almost all businesses work with mobile phones, with PCs, with the online platforms, and the big companies have already done a lot of the work. So look at the technology you're working with and understand all the integrated accessibility there already. The next point is understand where you fall into, where in the European Accessibility Act you're affected. So are you offering a service? Are you offering a product? if you're offering a product, in which of the categories are you located? And then again, like we did, look at the requirements and just think it through what that means in practice. And if you need an inspiration because you're just starting on the journey, we did the mapping, of course, tailored to our devices, but that might be an inspiration for you, that you understand, okay, this is the requirement, this is what happens in practice right now. And maybe you get then the idea of what that means for your own product. For services, of course, the mapping is not so relevant, but maybe Susanna has a good advice for the services part.
So thank you. I usually never argue with Sabine because she's the nicest person in our industry and I don't want to say anything against her, but the EN 301549 started out as a procurement standard. That is correct. That was back in the days. Since many, many years, it's now a standard for ICT products and services. The accessibility of ICT products and services. The procurement part of it is actually taken out of the title, and I think that's important because it's not just meant for people who do procurement. So I just wanted to say that. So it's also important to distinguish between what is in the law and what is in the standards. I agree we are delayed. Let us not argue about why the standards are delayed, but really the requirements are in the law. So the first thing is read the act. It's a long document, I know. And one of the most tricky things, trying not to be negative here, but it is difficult because there are general requirements and then there are requirements for products, there are requirements for services, and then on the third place, there are specific requirements for the specific products and services. You need to read in 3 places. That's not super easy, but the requirements are there. And then the standards are voluntary. So if you need more support with how to really implement this, then you can turn to the standards. And even if they are not ready yet, the 3 big ones, the one on ICT, accessibility for ICT products and services, the one on design for all, and the one on the built environment, the 3 ones that we are now currently revising, they're already out there. Okay, they will be updated. They are not finished in their the last bits and pieces of the harmonization, but there's still a lot of good data there. So the presentation Sabine showed where with the user requirements or functional performance statements, that is from the EN 301549, the user requirements kind of set up. So you can already start now by first looking at the requirements in the Act. And then if you need additional help, I would turn to the standards that are already out there and start working with them, because there's a lot of good data and good knowledge in there, even if there will be some small changes. It's not like we're going to rip up the whole idea of what accessibility is and write a completely new standard. We're doing reviews. That's going to be smaller things than I would have hoped, but that's what we can do. So I think there's a lot of good data out there.
And when it comes to looking a little bit long term, what would you say that businesses can think in terms of strategies that could adopt for this long-term success in meeting, and not just meeting for the, when the laws are enforced in June 2028 and 2025, but maintaining these European Accessibility Act requirements? Are there any strategies that we could mention here for businesses? Susanna?
Well, I would absolutely recommend becoming a member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and or let some of your key staff be certified as professionals in accessibility. That's a good start. And even if you are not having experts, super experts that need the professional certification, at least training, building internal competence is extremely important, because otherwise you will be always dependent on external suppliers, and that is expensive, and it's also not very sustainable. So competence building in-house, I think, is extremely important. And then also having the procedures or processes in place where one of the standards, the Design for All standard, can really help, because that is kind of a stepwise approach on how to achieving accessibility using a Design for All approach. So making sure that you are hiring people with disabilities, testing with people with disabilities, get involved in the community instead of just seeing this as technical requirements, because it's not, it's about humans. So it's really about the organizational piece and training, I would say, are the most important part to succeed in the long run. And then try to see it as something positive. I never, when people, oh, this is legislative, they kind of stop doing things. You need to wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to do something good. I'm going to make my design a little bit better for blind people. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Keep that energy going and see this as something positive. It's about making things better for all of us.
And Sabine, what would you add to that?
Of course, I agree
Strategy-wise,
with all that Susanna said. It's definitely a good starting point. Then I would just say the next part is just be conscious and make accessibility just the basic requirement. Like you said, the language for the organization, whether that is English or bilingual or anything, you just also said as a precondition, all we do is accessible. And then, of course, mistakes will happen. I mean, they happen to us as well, but that's not a problem. It's always trial and error, but you need to build a competence and you make it self-evident that accessibility is just something we do. It's not an add-on afterwards, because then it becomes complicated and tricky and expensive. It's just we do it, and that's the way we do it. And why do we do it? Because more and more we will have people with disabilities as employees. Everyone is looking for qualified personnel. It's out there, and some have disabilities and some don't, but we will have them in our companies. And you mentioned the impressive numbers of people with disabilities. So huge target group, whether they are as employees or colleagues or as consumer, they are everywhere. I mean, it's 1 in every 4th. So it's absolute business sense to be accessible. To build in-house competency, yes, I can also very much recommend the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, although the name is huge, but IAAP. It's a professional body where you go to learn. It's like everyone who starts in a new profession goes to a body to learn, and IAP is a great way to do that, and also to discuss the problems. Everyone runs into tricky situations where you don't know what to do, but that's the professional exchange, and for that it's a wonderful platform. And then as a third point, I would mention very importantly, seek the direct exchange. You don't learn English by never speaking to an English speaker. You have the direct exchange. Again, people with disabilities are a quarter of our population everywhere. And then ask the questions, and this is not about asking for free user testing. No, this is exchanging with the people in your employeeship, with the people around you, with your customers. It's feedback mechanism. You can integrate stakeholder consultations like we do for the GARI database, and then ask, be curious, and deal with the answers that come up. But I would also subscribe to Susanna, also be open for the fun in it, because we're talking about multimodal communication. It's really cool. And also, if you look at the accessibility features, they're not just something to implement a regulation. There are pretty sexy features in there and really cool technology. So get a little bit of that excitement that we have for the pixels and the storage and whatever our devices do. The accessibility features are really, really cool. So I invite you, check them out, check your own device, what it can actually do, and discover a little bit, this discovery spirit.
And we've heard from Christopher that businesses may lose the right to sell their products as one of the penalties for not complying with the laws that are being created based on the European Accessibility Act. But as we are looking at this whole topic from a more positive kind of angle, I would like to ask you, what are the main benefits that the European Accessibility Act can bring to businesses, and not only to businesses, but also to their customers? Susanna?
More customers, satisfied customers, and making it easier to sell in different markets, because we have harmonized rules, so that that if you sell to one part of Europe and then you can sell to another part of Europe, at least for accessibility, we have the same harmonized standard. And now if you are interested in selling whatever you are selling in the EU, that we now have the leading requirements, so then everything else will just be okay as well. So if you kind of look at what the EU is doing, we are currently leading this competition, if there is a competition in this, so that if you just meet those requirements, then everything else will be okay. That's kind of easy for a company. It's much harder to say, here I need to comply with this and there that, and I mean, for a global organization, that's horrible, and it takes a lot of time and money. So I think the harmonization piece is also important.
And Sabine?
One interesting point in the European Accessibility Act is the requirement for accessible information on accessibility features. And I think that's a really good push in the right direction, because in the past 15 years, the companies have done a lot to make the ICT companies have done a lot to make the product accessible, but they somehow forgot to communicate about it, or only to very, you find the information if you know where to look. But to really have the broad coverage, the mainstream know about accessibility, that we haven't achieved so far. And I'm hoping that the Accessibility Act is really helping us to put the information on the accessibility in the prominent marketing place, so that we can actually get the information to people who need it most. And, those features, they help not only people who identify with having a disability, it helps everyone who is a little bit older, who has a situational disability, who has a chronic illness, whatever. So those features are just tremendously helpful, and having them more prominent, marketed, and the consumer and everyone else informed about it is one of the big advantages, I think.
And when Sabine says over a little bit older, she means everyone over 35.
No, over 40 counts already.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for all these insights that you have shared with us today. Before we move to the questions from our audience, is there anything that you would like to add for this year, just before the European Accessibility Act comes into force?
Well, my favorite saying of this is really that I was in the same position when the Web Accessibility Directive entered into force, and at 1 year before that entered into force, public sector were asleep. They didn't move at all, very few of them. And then come 23rd of September 2018, they said, oh, what is happening? Why didn't you tell me? So that was a bit frustrating, I think, for many people, and especially when you were in the transposition, doing policy and legislation and so on. And there's so much more going on now. So I see a huge move towards accessibility. Then will it be successful or not? That remains to be seen. But really, companies are so much more on their toes than public sector ever was. So that, I think, is extremely rewarding. So if you feel alone, you are not alone. We are a big movement, and there's a lot of people here out to help you do the right thing. So just get going, I think, is the kind of the word for the day, I think.
Get going. Let's keep that. Yes. Sabine.
So I would say do your homework, because yes, there's a lot going on, but you won't be able to know how to implement the EAA by attending a webinar. So read the Act, read the annexes. And the first few pages might be painful, but at the same time, the more you read about it, the more you get into the logic. Also take the standard EN 31509. You don't need to read the whole oeuvre, but look at the requirement in Annex 1 and then find the equivalent in the standard and make the first connections. But you need to do the homework. And then you come to the webinar and ask a pointed question, and then you join IAAP and get into the open discussion and understand how you translate it for your own product. But for all those who haven't read the EAA, I think summertime is a good time to do it. And it won't take you the full summer, should be a thing of 2 days. So don't be too worried.
That's great. I think we have.
You should. Yeah, sorry, but
Go ahead.
Thank you for that, Sabine. I think it's a good place when you read the standard. Start with chapter 4. That's the heart of the standard, because that is where we explain the user needs. So.
And that's the benefit of having Susanna on the call. She knows it inside out.
I did read the whole, yeah.
I did read the whole thing as well, and I found it actually quite, the language is quite user-friendly, I would say. It is not possible, because it is not, is it, because it is an act and a directive? Would you like to see a more user-friendly version of it? What
Oh,
would
you're
you say?
speaking about the act.
Yes, about the act. Yes.
I don't think I should say anything about that, considering my clients, but I'm happy you found it useful.
Okay, so we have plenty of questions for you from our audience. So let's start with, I can see that some participants are asking about the UK specifically and what the impact of the European Accessibility Act will be to UK organizations. Do you have anything helpful to these UK organizations?
So I have no idea if the UK is planning to do anything because unfortunately, you left us for a while ago, as we all know. But if you are selling products and services in scope of the directive in Europe, then you are covered. It doesn't matter if you're a private or not-for-profit or public or whatever. And it also doesn't matter if you're a manufacturer, importer, distributor. I mean, any part of the value chain, if you are selling your products or services that are in scope of the directive in the EU, then you are covered by the Act. So we don't care about if you're a US or UK or whatever passport you have or the company. So yes.
Mm-hmm. And a very similar question is, will EEA countries such as Norway be enforcing the EAA in their own regions, as well as EU countries? And what about Switzerland?
So Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, the EEA, it's difficult this because it's similar to the Act, but those countries, they do implement directives, but slightly afterwards. So now Norway is implementing the Web Accessibility Directive this year. So they're doing their own negotiation process, but they are implementing the directives, but slightly, I shouldn't say slower, but after a certain delay. Switzerland is a different beast. We do not have any signs of implementation in Switzerland so far, but it could still happen.
Okay, and another question from the audience says, I work in the hospitality tourism industry. In what ways does the new law impact hotels? Is there something specific in the Act specifically for this industry?
Well, for example, everything that is e-commerce. So whenever you sell anything, and I guess that is also booking the rooms via a website, is in the EAA.
And if you have any kind of self-service terminal that many hotels have today could be also covered depending on, I mean, there are different parts. And of course, the computers and smartphones. And I mean, there are several things that could be covered as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to other products, a question about ebooks. Does the Act's definition of ebooks include PDFs that are sizable? For example, they look like books, or does it only apply to EPUB files and other ebook file types?
There is a specific definition of ebooks in the Act that says it's a service consisting of digital files that convey, I think, electric or digital version. I can't remember this, but it's kind of 10 lines. It doesn't say PDF is in there or PDF is not in there, but there is a specific definition of what an ebook is, as it is with e-commerce. And as Sabine said very clearly, e-commerce is very, very broad. Even if you have a business that is mainly a physical shop, but then you sell just small things online, then that is also e-commerce. So it's very broad definitions, and the ebook definition doesn't say that it has to be in one or the other format, and certainly not only EPUB.
And for clarifications of this kind of definitions, where could businesses go for clarifications? You know, is there any kind of a channel established? Where would businesses go?
For the definitions, I would go to the Act, because that's, yeah. It's,
Yeah, Sabine, have you got any other?
No, it's the same thing. So either the definition is directly written in the Act, or it refers you to the EU regulation that has the definition included. So they are all, I mean, this is a legal act, so very specific specifications or definitions for every single product and service that falls under the directive.
Mm-hmm. And from the questions, I can see that a lot of people are concerned about this specific kind of details. For example, one question is, does the EAA apply retrospectively to all content created prior to the Act? For example, an e-book that was digitized 10 years ago.
Tricky question. No, it doesn't apply backwards, so to speak. And there are, and now I need to say what Sabine said, read the Act first, ask the questions then, because there are also chapters that define exactly when the kind of cutoff dates are. So not for the idea of the Act generally is to look forward, but there are specific grace periods and cutoff dates. When it comes to ebooks, that is a really tricky one because those are that's really not defined. They do not have any grace period. So from the 28th of June, it's actually all your ebooks. That is a tough one, and I'm sure we will see a lot of disproportionate burden claims there. But for the others, it's very clear what they mean with archives and you know, documents that you have published before and so on. All of that, there are specific dates, and all of that is also defined in the Act.
Mm-hmm. And a question is about, for an international business operating in all of the regions and in the EU, how do we keep on top of which countries have implemented the EAA? And is there a central place for international companies to see how each region will differ in their interpretation of the legislation?
So first of all the EU countries need to implement it. Yes, there are a few slight deviations in the national transpositions. If you want to have some work, you can go to the website where you have all the different, where the countries have notified all the laws that they have changed or introduced to do the transposition into national law. But per se, you can just say, okay, the EAA applies in the EU from next year onwards. That is the law. And then you can, for very few things, you can go into national deviations. But like for the general requirements in Annex 1, they apply in the EU, and that's it. For understanding globally the accessibility regulations developments, so it depends. I mean, I would say I don't have an overview of everything, but there are specialized bodies that look at web accessibility regulations worldwide. You definitely, again, as Susanna said, I refer back to the IAP, it's the professional body. So that is, of course, the place where you have all the accessibility officers from the different countries, where they also have an open forum where you can say, okay, what's happening in Canada? Can you help me out? Or any other country. So this is the place to ask questions. There are a few mapping exercises online where they try to summarize everything around accessibility legislation in different countries. They are never exhaustive, you know, and even if somebody does the exercise, very soon it gets outdated because it's a tremendous work. So just answering the perspective from an international association, we do a lot of monitoring work in-house, also about through the international bodies, and then also through our working groups where we have people in different countries that provide us the updates. But it will involve a lot of your own work to keep a global overview. Unless Susanna has the secret to the central source.
No, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't. But it's important. I get this question a lot. How do they differ? That's not really the point. This is a minimum harmonization directive, so it applies everywhere. And then some member states may go beyond. But I mean, we don't have there. Just as Sabine said, there's just small deviations. So it's really, remember that it's the minimum requirements. I would recommend IAAP professional certification that is called core competencies. We have a body of knowledge that is made for people who want to sit for that exam and take that exam. And the body of knowledge is free of charge. You don't need to be a member. So you can, there is a lot of, it's not, I'm not saying it has everything, but it's a good place to start if you want a list of the major accessibility legislation around the world, because that is what you're supposed to know if you get certified. So, but the source of that with many links is on the IAAP website. So that could be one place to start.
And maybe just to add on that, then subscribe to the 3-4 key newsletters. So one is IAAP or IAAP, like Susanna says, we're talking about the same association if people wonder. So subscribe there, you get the newsletter where you get at least the updates on new developments. The GATES initiative, GAATES, has a newsletter that provides information. Go to the G3 ICT website. They have always up-to-date information. And then maybe there are 1 or 2 others that don't come to mind right now, but once you have subscribed to that information, you know, it's just like a domino. You have that information, you get the next, the next, the next. But the important thing is, don't get scared off because it's too much. Just start with the 1-2 steps that are feasible. And from there on, again, you will find your breadcrumbs to follow. So it's not a problem, but start now. Subscribe now, start learning now, and then it will come.
And another question is about the extension to 2030. So the question is it true that we technically have until 2030 to become compliant with existing products and services?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
The answer is clear. Thank you. And how about internal procurement for software? Does are this actually EAA?
Vayia, can you repeat? We lost
you for half. We lost you for a while. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I can repeat. Is it? Yes, my internet connection is unstable, so I will repeat the question. Would the EAA apply to internal procurement for software, or is it only covering external outputs with clients?
You mean B2B software then?
I believe that's the question about, yes.
Oof.
So it's a consumer directive. So it really depends if I mean, internal can mean many things, but B2B is not covered. It's always for consumers. But if you are, I mean, if you're buying computers or software for your staff, I mean, that is kind of internal. It depends on how you define, but it doesn't, I mean, yeah, it really depends on the situation and what sector you are in, if you are covered or not.
And I mean, that actually, if you don't develop it yourself, but you're buying, that's the easiest part. You just include the accessibility requirements in your tender, and then the others need to fulfill the requirements. But in any case, it would be good policy to insist on that, because again, you know, we have a shortage of employees. There might be an employee with a disability coming in. They will have to use that platform. And, you know, it goes on. And also the accessibility legislation, you know, it will not, I don't think it stops here. I mean, basically, you should count on everything I do going forward needs to be accessible at some point. And again, if I'm buying stuff, I'm in the privileged situation that I can set as a requirement. It needs to fulfill WCAG, AAA, or the EN 31509. I set the requirement, they need to deliver. So that should just be good policy.
And I don't know how the word procurement is used here, if it's more like buying things or if it's really procurement. Actually, the first legislation that happened under this period when the Commission started to work more precisely with digital accessibility was the procurement directive updates, where it's really the requirements sharpened a lot in 2017. So that was the first thing happening before the Web Accessibility Directive and the Accessibility Act entered into force. So if you want support if you would like to procure accessible, then you have a really good support in the Procurement Directive, the way it has been updated since 17. And that is also pointing to AAA, which is pointing to the standards. So there's a lot of argument or ammunition if that is what you're doing. Otherwise, I'd say in the EU at least, is usually the local or national legislation that covers anti-discrimination, that takes care of how you treat staff and internal systems and so on. That is usually more strongly enforced within the anti-discrimination laws.
And a question came after you've mentioned, Susanna, about all the standards other than the EN 301549. Could you just give us a little explanation of what other standards you were referencing there?
Yes. So when the EU is implementing legislation on accessibility, it creates mandates. That is a standardization request to all the European standardization organizations to get together and work on harmonized documents that will then be published in the official journal, which means that they act as presumed conformance, which means that you can actually look at the standard to see if you are compliant or not. So in the current mandate, we are updating 3 standards, we are creating 3 new standards, and we are also updating 2 technical reports. So blah, 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 a lot of things. So the 301549, my baby, is of course the most important part of that. But we're also updating the 17161, which is the Design for All standard, which is a procedural standard of how to use the Design for All concept in order to achieve accessibility. And then it's the EN 17210, which is the accessibility and usability of the built environment, which may sound strange because, hey, the Accessibility Act only covers digital, yes, but the member states may also, on a voluntary basis, opt in for adding the built environment into the accessibility legislation as well. So that is also being updated. So those were the ones I think I mentioned before, but the 3 ones that we are then developing new are for non-digital information, for support services, and for emergency communication. And then I leave the technical reports for now because they are just informative. There's a lot of information. I have a good source for this, if I may send it to people afterwards. Yeah.
That would be great, thank you. And something that we get asked quite often, and we have a question from the audience: what are acceptable forms of evidence to demonstrate that a business is compliant?
You want to take that, Sabine?
Yeah, okay, good. So usually for market access directives, the preferred way for industry is to use harmonized standards. And those are the standards that Susanna just mentioned. And they will come with a little bit delay, but let's just say when we have them, this will be the way, because harmonized standard means if I as a manufacturer can certify I comply with the standard, then the regulator knows, okay, fine, she complies with the directive. There are 2 other ways that you can choose. One is the self-declaration. That is a self-assessment by the manufacturer who just looks at the requirements in Annex 1 and does their own assessment in saying, okay, this is how I implemented it and I consider that this fulfills the requirement. Can be good, but if you have a national regulator that challenges you on that, then you need to find some proof, and that might end up in a negotiation between your conviction and the conviction of the regulator. So this is a little bit of a risky approach. And the third way that we have to show compliance for market access directive is notified laboratories. That is expensive. And currently we don't have labs specialized in accessibility. So for the EAA, not really a viable option. From the perspective of the big ICT companies, I can tell you they all want to have the harmonized standards. And we already are struggling with the little bit of delay that we have, because that means for the time being, we are in a legal insecurity. That said, we know most of how to implement, but even a little bit that we don't know exactly makes our companies nervous. So harmonized standards are really usually the way to go to show compliance with the Market Access Directive.
Susanna, do you have something to add to this?
I think it was a good explanation of this, but I also want to stress that don't be too. I agree with Sabine. Standards are the kind of the secure way, but if you really have an innovative company and if you think that you can do this in a better way, don't let the standard kind of be a barrier to your innovation. I mean, you can do other things. That's why they are voluntary. So if you think, I mean, test with users, and if you are convinced that this idea is much better, I mean, we need to open up for that, and that is what the Commission is doing with this way of making requirements. So I also want to say that there is a flexibility and there is an innovation, and of course it's the surveillance authorities in each country that you will have to maybe convince. But there is also for products, there's also the EC mark that will also apply for this. So services a little bit more fluffy as usual, but for products, the CE marking is also used for the Act.
That's great. Thank you so much. We don't have any more time for any more questions, but as Emma mentioned, we will try and get as many of the questions answered on our EAA blog. Thank you, Sabine, and thank you, Susanne. I will pass you back to Emma.
So thank you so much, Vayia, Susanna and Sabine, for that very informative session on the European Accessibility Act. And thank you to everyone who participated as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, any unanswered questions, we hope to answer some of them online in the next few days. And you'll also receive an email with a link to access them. We will also update Christopher Patnoe's video as well, as we believe we had some issues and it was only audio today. So we'll update that in the recording as well. And so, yeah, we hope today's session was very informative. And if you would like some help getting ready for the EAA, our accessibility consultants can assist you with services like headline reviews, full accessibility audits, and user testing. So you could scan the QR code that's on the screen now, or visit abilitynet.org.uk/speak-r-experts. And if you want to begin those conversations with our consultants. We also provide digital accessibility and inclusion training. If you use the code AbilityNet webinar 10, you can save 10% in 2024 for our online training courses. That's for individuals. So visit abilitynet.org.uk/training. We also provide in-house group training and e-learning training. You can visit abilitynet.org.uk/e-learning, or scan the QR code on the screen there. So thank you again, Vayia, Susanna, Sabine, and everyone who's joined us. Please complete the feedback form that you'll be directed to, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Bye, everyone.